you get the feeling of how again, like the idea there would be so you would go through each of the 10 non-virtues, right? Like we just did one, because obviously we couldn't do that for every single non-virtue, but you would do the same thing about lying, right? You do the same thing about sort of meaningless talk. You do the same thing about stealing. You would go through all of them in that same way. And by the way, and if you didn't do one in this life, like if let's say there's a certain non-virtuous action like that you never did in this life, well, it's like the idea in Buddhism is you've done it in some past life, so you would do the same thing, right? So you would imagine, like, so you would think, like, wow, in a past life I murdered somebody, right? And then you would think about the incredible suffering you caused for them, for their family. Then you would think about this, then you would go through, like, what kind of afflictive emotion did I have? What does anybody have when they do that? What was the motivation? Did they actually completely? And then you would think, wow, and the result of that is rebirth in hell or something, lower realms, and then having a short life and having having a tendency to either be killed and be around violence and all that. And again, the idea being to develop that feeling of, like, Lama Zopa Rinpoche sometimes says, like, if you contemplate this enough, it's like the idea of doing negative actions, you relate to it like the way if somebody offered you, like, a pot of vomit, it's like, like, it's hard not to gag, like, just to be around something like that. It's like that feeling of, like, it's hard not to vomit yourself. Just that you develop the idea is that towards negative actions, you develop an actual feeling like that. Does that make sense? And so but also do you get the point though that we go really into the details, right? You don't avoid the details, right? You go into the details of why did I do what I did? What was in my mind? What was my actual motivation? And oftentimes it's hard, right? Because you don't want to admit, wow, I wanted to hurt somebody. Like, it's disturbing, actually, and it should be disturbing. But part of the point is it should be disturbing if we're honest with ourselves, in terms of, like, the process of the negative karmas, right? And it should also be disturbing, the idea, wow, like Pabonka Rinpoche says that. He says, if people don't think deeply, in Islam Rim text, he says, people, like, oftentimes, if we don't do this kind of contemplation, we say, oh, I'm a pretty good person. Like, I'm a nice guy, whatever. And then he says, but if we actually analyze, he says, and you go through this, it's like, oh, that was a totally professional, great job of negative karma. I really did it perfectly. Like, I didn't leave anything out. And then he says, and that's the result of that is all this negative stuff, right? And then he says, and then he actually points out, and then he says, and then think about your positive karmas. And, like, it can be disturbing, because if you say, like, all right, like, when I said the harsh speech, like, I really wanted to hurt them. Like, I was angry, and then, like, if you say, well, when I did something compassionate, right? And then if you check, now sometimes it could be overwhelming compassion like that, right? And that's wonderful. But sometimes you can see, oh, wait a second, like, when I was doing that compassionate action, like, I kind of wanted people to notice, and I was, like, a little bit annoyed to have to be doing it, like, I didn't feel like it really, but I did it because I thought, well, I'm supposed to do that. Well, that's not really compassion, actually. That's something else. Like, and so he says, like, sometimes if you actually analyze deeply in your own experience, you can see, first you think, oh, I'm this wonderful person, and then he says, oh, wow, like, if you start to see, like, when I lied, and when I did harsh speech, and when I manipulated people, I did it with, like, a completely clear, strong mind. Whereas when I did these positive things, it was like, I don't know, it was more like, maybe there were a few moments of genuine, but not too much. And, like, if you check, right, like, for example, again, like, I don't know which example you guys thought of, but, like, if I think of the worst examples for myself, like, I can think of times when, like, I can think of times when I was, like, really upset and angry, right? And it's like, like, you're going to sleep and you're thinking about it, and you wake up and you're still thinking about it, right? And then, like, it lasts for a few days, and it was, like, overwhelming, right? And I say, how many times was I, like, overwhelmed that way with love for days? I couldn't sleep because, I don't mean, like, romantic love, right? That's different. This is, like, love, like, loving kindness, right? Like, I couldn't sleep because I was so overwhelmed with love, and then I woke up and I was like, I can't wait to act with love, and I was obsessed about how to express that love most beautifully, and, like, it's like, then Pabonka Rinpoche says, if you're honest in that way, then you'll become disturbed by yourself, like, through your own self-analysis. And he said that's a good sign. you know, like that, then you want to change, right? And you want to shift that, and you want to let go of the anger or whatever it would be. And so, you know, and that's why in the text, I just want to go back actually. There's this line, I don't know, actually I won't find it right now. There's a line that says like, you know, why is it that people don't really do the practice of karma? One Lama asks another, and the other Lama says, because it's difficult. Right? I think it was Lama Jomdompa or one of those Kanapa Lamas. But he says, it's difficult to do. Right? And this is the part that's difficult. Like, so I want to get into it today a little bit. You know, it's not that it's difficult in the sense of intellectual. Like, emptiness is much harder to understand intellectually. Right? It's not that this is hard to understand intellectually. It's that it's hard because we don't want to face that, right? Like, you know, and like Prabhupada says sometimes, I like his point. He says we'd rather visualize intricate, you know, sort of complex mandalas or deity, you know, we'd rather do that than look at like, oh wow, I wanted to hurt somebody. And maybe the person, if you're honest, like a lot of times the person I want to hurt was somebody who I say I love. Right? That's often the case. Sometimes it's some stranger in a store or somebody on the road. But more often it's somebody I claim I love. And again, like you say, oh, I'm a good person, I love so-and-so, right? But then if we actually check, it's like, well, that's not love, that's hatred. Like, you know, like, and it's not to say I'm a terrible person either, that's not the goal here. The goal is to be honest, right? It's like holding up a mirror, right? And to look honestly, you know, like you can't fix your hair or something if you don't have a mirror or whatever, like, it's like to look honestly and say, well, what do I need to change then? You know? And if we do this over and over again, the point is that if we do that kind of contemplation over again, it does change, right? Then the next time, like if you think that over and over and you think, like a particular person in your life who you were harsh with, right? And you do that contemplation, I just want to say this too, because this is what Ken Sherpshade's advice was. He's talked about this kind of thing. He said, you know, if you meditate on it for a month, right? Like, there are some things where you say, oh, can I make progress and will I become enlightened? But like, think about it this way. If you were to meditate on just that for a month, right? It will change. Like, in other words, then when the person does something and you usually would speak harshly, after 1 month of every day thinking that way, you know, the impulse might come still to speak harshly, but you'll say, oh my God, but no, you know, I'm not going to do that. Especially if you really go through the contemplations, right? Or the same thing, like if you have a tendency to, let's say, like, well, you know, I don't know, it's like more convenient to lie, right? Like, about certain things, because, you know, like I don't want somebody to think, you know, I want them to see me a certain way, so I'll just say, no, I didn't do that. And then you contemplate this way over and over again, right? Like, what does that do to your relationships? And what kind of person are you? And what kind of karma is that create for the future? And, you know, then what's it like to be lied to, right? And how does that feel when somebody lies to you? And do I want to have that in this life and in all my future lives, be somebody who's lied to? And you keep contemplating that way. You know, then when the impulse comes to lie, it's like, it will, you know, like that doesn't take like 10 years to change, right? If you stay with one non-virtue for a month, for sure, right? It'll like be like, there will come some feeling of like, goodness, I don't want to do that. It's like, sort of sickening or something. It's like, whoa, you know, like some kind of, it should be a visceral feeling. And that you can do, right? We can, like, and the lamas, I mean, not just Kensho, but the lamas will say, point out, like, that's real Dharma practice, right? Like, that's the actual Dharma practice to protect you, right? Because Dharma should mean that it should protect you, right? And so what they're saying is that's protects you because you change, right? Whereas other stuff, I don't know, doesn't necessarily, if you're not doing this, then the rest doesn't really matter in some way, right? Like, if you're doing other things but you're not changing your ethical behavior and how you treat people, then it's like, what's the word? Like not real practice. Does that make sense? Kind of. So, but this is the way, and one last thing I'll say is like, and it really, I just want to say my own, it says this in the teachings, but also my own experience is it really doesn't help at all to say the Buddha said you shouldn't do that. That's just my experience. Like, you know, if the Buddha said you shouldn't lie, or something. The Buddha said you shouldn't talk harshly. But then when somebody does something, you still talk harshly, right? Like, because that's not what convinces somebody. You know, because Buddha's not here now, right? I mean, he is in a way, but his body's not. You know, it's Nirmanakaya is not. But his teachings are, and so we have to apply the teachings to ourselves. And the way to apply it is to really look at the details. What did I do? Why did I do it? What's it like when I do that? You know, and if you say no, it really works well for me when I speak harshly. You know, then that's of course your choice. That's your business. But these are not like. Also, these aren't hard ones, actually, right? Like. These are easy ones to understand, actually, if you check your own experience. You know, because also, like, I mean, the good thing with harsh speech is that somebody will yell back at you pretty quick, too. So, you know, It doesn't take long to see the result. Anyway, any questions about that?
I had one question, Bjorn. So sometimes when your body is weak, or sometimes when you're hungry, or some body conditions propelling you into a mental state where you become harsher. I'm just wondering, debating myself, would we attribute that to ignorance of the three poison, or how do we define that part? Because actually the conditions are not prevailing in a sense that the other conditions will prevail, but still you end up being harsh. What would be the cause of that?
Yeah, it's a good. Like I guess, in a way, I guess one thing I would say is that, like, so being tired or stressed out or something like that, I would say that's like a conditions, like we're being hungry, for example, or other things, like thirsty, they're hot, too hot, there are many people who like those kinds of conditions, but still the main cause, like, so that, and then let's say I speak harshly, right? The main cause is still my own afflictive emotion, right? Anger, let's say, or whatever it would be. But those are cooperative conditions that make it easier to get angry, right? Like, or is it true, right? Let's say if you say, well, if you're well rested and you're not overly stressed out and you had a good meal and you're not thirsty, you're not hot, you're not hot this, then of course it's maybe a little easier to stay patient. But one thing is important is that you can see like bodhisattvas, doesn't matter, right? For them, they could be very hot, cold, whatever, all that, they still stay patient, right? So that's not the cause then, it's a condition. Like the main cause is one's own familiarity. Like, so let's say if I know, okay, when I get really overtired, I tend to get impatient, right? If I say that, right? But that's my tendency, because I've tended in past lives probably to be an impatient person then, and so on. And other people, when they get hot or tired, they don't do that. So I still have to recognize, okay, that's me then. It's my tendency. So I would say the first thing is that so then the being tired, let's say in that case, is like a cooperative condition that leads for me to that, if it's me, right, to that tendency then become angry or something. And so then one has to take responsibility to say, wow, then I need to, if I'm going to be careful with karma, I need to take responsibility not to let myself get overtired. And then Shantideva points out, right, he says, so first thing is like, so we have to avoid the situation, I have to avoid those conditions. And then Shantideva says, and if you fail to avoid those conditions for some reason and you still get overtired because of something you weren't planned, there's a point where in his text where he says, then act like a piece of wood. What he's getting at is if you're tending to go like, okay, I'm in this situation, then through mindfulness, he's like, then, like sort of go somewhere and do nothing, or I think the Dalai Lama's junior tutor once said, then go take a nap, like he's like, if you're tending that, he's like, better that than anything else, because, you'll have to deal with the karmic results of the negative action, so it's your responsibility then to go off and act like a piece of wood means go take a nap, basically, go be quiet somewhere and calm down or something. So that's the idea, is that still we have to, and I guess I'll make one more point in general about that, is, because the Buddhist teachings don't emphasize this point that much, but I mean, it's there implicit in that line, go be like a piece of wood, but there's an idea also that in Buddhism, that I would apply to this point, which is that we have to also take responsibility to set reasonable boundaries in our life. Because, in other words, if I know, if I take this level of stress on, 90% of the time I'm going to get angry and impatient, and then I say, oh, but I'll do it again. Well, then that's my, again, your point, then that's my, you can say ignorance or irresponsible. It's me being irresponsible and not taking care of my own karma and my own mind. Or so if I know from experience, wow, I get, if I take on that much, I tend to get impatient. And also then we have to be careful, like, because we often make this mistake. So I'm going to give a metaphor for a second. If I reach 9 out of 10, I'm going to become impatient and angry, right? And then I say, well, okay, so I'll set up my life so I'm at an 8.75 all the time. Well, in other words, then I'm being irresponsible, because of course the universe isn't set up according to, so that everything's going to be perfect.
Right.
For me, so I need to set my life up so I'm going to 7, or something. Okay, then if circumstances are, then if there's bad weather or somebody else is freaking out or there's, some other environmental problem, I've got some leeway, And if I don't take responsibility to set my life up that way, then I'm, going back to I'm using that point about the wheel of sharp weapons, that I'm setting up the cause for my own suffering and negative karma. And that is ignorance, yeah, that'd be a form of ignorance. And almost like irresponsible, in a way, because we have to take and we have to be honest with ourselves, because oftentimes I've had that experience where I look and see, well, somebody else could do that, and somebody else could be at this level and not get impatient, but I have to say, well, I'm not as good as them. I have to be honest with myself and say, I'm not as strong as that person in my mind. Like, that person can take on this level and they stay patient. But if I try to do that level, there's a traditional, there was a metaphor that said, if a, what's it called, like if a dog tries to imitate a lion in a fight, it won't, it'll get hurt, And it's like, to be honest with ourselves, that like, if I'm not like a lion, then I shouldn't act like a lion, like that. So I'm the dog, metaphor.
Hey, Lauren, that also goes to I think you mentioned that a couple of classes back about the intention that comes from, I think you also use an example like resetting your intention, like you have to check, like if you had an intention of, say, like benefit, the center, whatever, and then you start doing something, but then checking back, is that still your motivation? Is that still your intention?
Mm-hmm.
So you always have to check also in cases like, with your karma and your behavior, like maybe it started something and then, like anger or something started arising. So it's also like a way of, you gotta check, you gotta constantly check what's your intention at that time. Even because it could change from being a positive intention, and then for something was said, something was done, and then it triggers something in your mind, and then just a small tiny bit, and it just became a positive action that was you were intending. Now you're changing it
Mm-hmm.
in your mind. Mm-hmm. You might still be going like, yeah, your appearance is like you're still, but you're still, that is that intention that, did it change? Is it now like a negative or maybe a jealousy thing in there,
Yeah.
or something like that?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it makes me think of that.
Yeah, that's
Like
right.
attachment
Yeah,
arises,
Right,
and it's
right.
gotta be your way, it's your
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
I think setting up the tone in the morning helps me a lot about being wholesome.
oh yeah,
Another factor is I think mindfulness at each instance when you're talking something or doing an action, that kind of checks you. Oh, am I doing it right? Am I not doing it right? Gradually, I think it becomes a habit. I'm not sure, maybe that's how it goes. I do a little bit of practice of that. But mindfulness is the one that really helps you checking, rechecking, like you said, rebooting yourself. And stopping yourself would be the first act from generating that kind of motivation. Then gradually it becomes a habit, I guess. My experience.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna do the sure. So the first. So if you were gonna like meditate on karma, right? There are. So the first is these general. The first we covered, right, were the general guideline, the 4 general points. Then there was the specifics of karma, right? So you would go through all 10 non-virtues. We did one example. I want to skip the next one. The next one, there was the next section, which is the positive karmic process. We started with that, with generating a positive motivation for the Lama Chopa, the Guru Puja. But there are many points that we can go into. But in general, the idea of positive karma, right, is it has to have the opposite of all those others. So it has to have no afflictive emotion as the motivation, right? So you can't say. Remember this whole point, though. I'll just mention it very briefly that when you meditate on positive karma, you have to remember positive karma isn't like the external action isn't what makes it a positive karma. So if you're like doing, like Gabe was doing the water bowls earlier, or if we're doing a ritual like the Guru Puja or something, the fact that it externally looks like a Buddhist isn't what makes it positive. What makes it positive is the motivation. And so you have to check, like, whereas did I have no afflictive emotion at the time, right? Then, like, so there's no anger, there's no pride, there's no craving, there's no, like self-centered desire, there's no ignorance, that it was done out of some positive motive like love, compassion, patience, tolerance, faith, devotion. Those are examples of positive motives. Then there was of non-afflicted, unafflicted states of mind, and then there was some positive wish, right? Like I want to do this practice because I want to create. So if Gabe's doing the water bowls and he's thinking, I want to create positive karma in order to be a benefit to others, right? And with some sense of devotion to the Buddha, and then he's doing that action with a wish to make offerings in order to be of help to others, that's positive karma, right? And then if he does the action all the way through to completion and finishes it and says, wow, that was great, I did something positive, that's an example of positive karma. And the idea is that you would contemplate all those points, like, okay, was my mind, when I was doing, if you were going to, let's say if you're going back over your day, you might think, okay, what was in my mind as I did? I sat down to meditate, but did I sit down, what was my real reason for doing that? Did I do it? Why? Was there genuinely a positive motive? And was I not having an afflictive emotion, and so on? And so you would contemplate those things, right? And then there are all these other points about the kind of full, remember that we went through that. There's also a way to meditate on how to get a perfect human rebirth, and then how to get a perfect human rebirth with all those unique factors like good health and long life, and that are conducive to spiritual practice. So anyways, you could contemplate those, but I won't go into that because it's similar to what we just did, and I want to save time now to do a very important practice that I want to really emphasize for the rest of the time, which is purification, how to purify negative karma, because that's very important. And I'm actually going to go through it in the order, there are different orders that one does the 4 powers, right? There are 4 powers of purification. They're presented in one order in the text. I'm going to do a slightly different order that is the way Khenpo Rinpoche presented it for the easy path. And I just like them in that order, but it's the same exact teaching. It's the same 4 points. But psychologically, I find this order most helpful. So since we're practicing for daily practice, like meditation practice, I thought to do it this way. So